Today we're going to be reading the Odyssey Part 1, Episode 2, called I Am Laertes Son. The first thing I want you to do is to create a text box at the top of your page, and I want you guys to write down what you're doing during reading. So during reading, I want you guys to focus on Odysseus' character. So I want you to highlight textual evidence that reveals Odysseus's character. And the reason being is that we are working on that summative assessment and gathering evidence because, again, you can either choose to write about Odysseus and his character traits and how they're developed, or Polyphemus when we get to the episode of the Cyclops. So again, the very first thing you do when you're going to be reading one of our episodes is to read the red boxed in italicized portion of the text that says read this first. So follow along with me as I read to you. Again, our focus is on Odysseus' character. Odysseus is found by the daughter of Alcinous, king of the Phaeacians. Phaeacians, I can never say that word. That evening, he is a guest at court. Books 6 through 8. To the ancient people of Greece and Asia Minor, all guests were God-sent. They had to be treated with great curiosity before they could be asked to identify themselves and state their business. That night at the banquet, the stranger who was washed up on the beach was seated in the guest's place of honor. A minstrel or singer is called, and the mysterious guest gives him a gift of pork, crisp with fat, and requests a story about Troy. In effect, Odysseus is asking for a song about himself. Odysseus weeps, so he starts crying, as the minstrel's song reminds him of all his companions who will never see their homes again. Now Odysseus is asked by the king to identify himself. It is here that he begins the story of his journey. So when we think about the timeline in the back of the room, if you guys look back there, you'll see that we read Calypso, and now we're going to be reading I Am Laertes Son, where Odysseus is telling his story about what happened on his journey to the king. So we're going to see from his perspective what happened to him along the way. So follow along as I read to you, and again, we'll stop every once in a while to discuss some things, and I'll have you fill some things out on your characterization chart. As you're listening, make sure that you're highlighting anything that you see that relates to Odysseus' character, and I guess what I would do too is write in the margin the character traits that you see revealed. So I'm just going to change my highlighter to, I don't know, pink maybe, so that I can highlight along the way as well. All right, again, the Odyssey, I Am Laertes Son. Now this was the reply Odysseus made. I am Laertes' son, Odysseus. Men hold me formidable for guile in peace and war. This fame has gone abroad to the sky's rim. Okay, I want you to pause there and think about this. He's saying that men hold him formidable, which means he's impressive, for guile, and guile means cunning or tricky. So do you think this is something that we should maybe highlight as far as his character is concerned? Yeah, I think we should. So I'm going to switch it over to my highlighter. I'm going to highlight this section. And if you think about the terms that we have been studying or that you looked up before we started this unit, we looked up and we looked at the word cunning, which means tricky. We also have the word confident. And so what I want you to do now is to just take a minute to write in the margin what character traits you think are being represented. So for me, I think it's showing that he's cunning or tricky. So I am going to actually, where's my thing? Let's see here. I don't know if I can. Well, I'll just do this. All right, so I think he's being cunning or tricky. I also think he's being confident. Some people don't look at that as confidence. They think he's being kind of cocky or boastful or arrogant. So if you feel that way, you might want to write those traits down as well. Arrogant, maybe he's boastful. Okay. So then Odysseus goes on to say, line 130, my home is on the sun-peaked sea mark of Ithaca, under Mount Neon's wind-blown robes of leaves, in sight of other islands, Dolicon, Same, wooded Zacynthos, Ithaca, being most lofty in that coastal sea, and northwest, while the rest lie east and south, a rocky isle, but good for a boy's training. I shall not see on earth a place more dear, though I have been detained long by Calypso, loveliest among goddesses, who held me in her smooth caves to be her heart's delight. As Circe of Aea, the enchantress, desired me, and detained me in her hall. But in my heart I never gave consent. So basically here, he's saying by not giving consent, that he never truly fell in love with her. So I'm going to take a second and just make that note in my margin here. So Odysseus is claiming that he never fell in love with Calypso. All right, I want you guys to now think about whether or not, based on what we just read, you would define Odysseus as someone who is loyal. Loyal. So take a minute to either look that word up if you don't know it or talk to a partner about whether or not you feel Odysseus here is loyal. All right. We are going to now talk a little bit about where Odysseus is from. So he's talking about in lines 30, I guess lines 130 through line 140 about his home, how it's on the sea mark of Ithaca. So he's from Ithaca. And he also says that it's a good place on line 136, a rocky isle. So it's not like grass or easy terrain, but it's good for a boy's training, referencing the fact that he was prepared for war and fighting because he was from Ithaca, a rocky island. All right, we're going to go down now to where we left off. Line 145. Where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? In far lands he shall not, though he find a house of gold. What of my sailing, then, from Troy? What of those years of rough adventure weathered under Zeus? The wind that carried west from Ion brought me to Ismaros, on the far shore, a strong point on the coast of the Cicones. I stormed that place and killed the men who fought. Plunder we took, and we enslaved the women to make division equal shares to all. So I want to stop there, and I'm going to highlight a section. You guys should highlight as well. So here Odysseus is talking about his travels, and he said that he stormed that place and killed the men who fought. Plunder we took, and we enslaved the women to make division equal shares to all. Okay, so if he storms a place and kills all the men there, then he says we plunder. So that means they stole. They took whatever they could, and we enslaved the women. So they made them basically slaves and gave everyone equal shares, all of his shipmates and himself. So I want you to take a moment, again, and in the margin, next to that highlighted area, I want you and a partner to brainstorm all the character traits that you think this piece of textual evidence could be used to support as far as a character trait is concerned for Odysseus. All right, line 155. After they had plundered and enslaved the women, he says, but on the spot I told them, back and quickly, out to sea again. My men were mutinous. And that word mutinous, who can tell me what that means? Good, yep. Yep, they were kind of revolting against Odysseus, not listening to his commands. So he says they were fools on stores of wine. So they drank a lot of wine. They maybe were drunk. Sheep after sheep they butchered by the surf, and shambling cattle feasting, while fugitives went inland, running to call to arms the main forest of Sicons. This was an army trained to fight on horseback or, where the ground required, on foot. They came with dawn over the train like the leaves and blades of spring. So he's saying that they were drunk, not listening to him. They were mutinous men, and they were eating all of this cattle, feasting on the cattle. Line 164. So doom appeared to us. So because of the actions, bad things are about to happen, Odysseus says. Dark word of Zeus for us, our evil days. My men stood up and made a fight of it, backed on the ships, with lances kept in play from bright morning through the blaze of noon, holding our beach, although so far outnumbered. But when the sun passed toward unyoking time, and unyoking time just means late afternoon, then the Achaeans one by one gave way. 6 benches were left empty in every ship that evening when we pulled away from death. So I want you to take a minute, and I want you to draw an inference here about what Odysseus is trying to tell us, the reader, when he says 6 benches were left empty in every ship that evening when we pulled away from death. And write it in the margin of your text. Right, lines 174. And this new grief we bore with us to see, so they were sad. Grief. Our precious lives we had, but not our friends. So he's saying, although we made it out alive, we were upset, we were sad because we lost so many of our shipmates and our friends. No ship made sail next day until some shipmate had raised a cry 3 times for each poor ghost unfleshed by the Sicons on that field. So that was a ritual that the Greeks would do. So they would, for each shipmate who perished, they would cry out 3 times for each one. Now Zeus, the lord of cloud, roused in the north a storm against the ships, and driving veils of squall moved down like night on land and sea. So here Zeus threw up a huge storm. The bows of the ship went plunging against the gusts. Sails cracked and lashed out strips in the big wind. We saw death in that fury, dropped the yards, unshipped the oars, and pulled for the nearest lee. Then 2 long days and nights we lay offshore, worn out and sick at heart, tasting our grief, until a 3rd dawn came with ringlets shining. So 3 days had passed. Then we put up our masts, hauled sail, and rested, letting the steersman and the breeze take over. I might have made it safely home that time, but as I came round, Malea, the current took me out to sea, and from the north a fresh gale drove on me past Cerinthia. 9 days I drifted on the teeming sea before dangerous high winds.